Best advice for a CISO. Go.
For a new CISO or an expanded CISO role, always focus on quality, not quantity. Focus targeted metrics of performance, targeted goals, targeted frameworks. Get those done. Don't worry about everything in the world.
It's time to begin the CISO Series podcast.
Welcome to the CISO Series podcast. My name is David Spark. I'm the producer of the CISO Series. My co-host for this episode, it's Andy Ellis. He's the operating partner over at Wild Ventures and a long-time former CSO. Also, did your title go from CISO to CSO, or did you, when you kind of bumped to that role, immediately became CSO?
It went straight to CSO, partly because I'd already owned the domain name CSO Andy, and so I decided that I did not want to have a title that didn't match my domain name.
You know what? That's a great idea for anybody, is get the title you want and your name.com.
Yeah.
And then when they give you the title, go, no, it has to be vice president because it's vicepresidentdave.com.
Right. I mean, the challenge now is like, I'm a CEO, I'm an operating partner, so maybe I should create a whole bunch of websites with all the different titles I carry, but I don't know that I can afford that many.
Good point. By the way, an excellent tip, though, for moving up in your job. We're available at CISOseries.com. There are other programs on our network, and if you have yet to discover them, please go check them out.
But only after you've listened to all of our episodes.
Yes. Go back through the entire archive, even before Andy actually joined. Because
those don't matter as much.
Don't matter the ones earlier. I'm always amazed, by the way, that there are people who do go back to episode 1, which I, by the way, do not recommend. I can't stress that enough. The first few episodes are embarrassing.
Yep. Never do season 1.
Yeah. No, season 1 got good, but first few episodes of season 1, I would avoid if I were you.
Yep.
Our sponsor for today's episode is Material Security. Secure your productivity suite. Everyone's using one. And is your security up to snuff? Well, we'll be talking about it a little bit later in the show. But first, Andy, we're recording this considerably before RSA, but this is going to air the week after RSA. So we're making our predictions now. People can call us on it because they will hear it right after RSA. Your prediction as to what the topic, and by the way, it's going to be pretty obvious, what the buzz topic will be at RSA this year.
So I think the buzz topic is going to be AI enabled. And that's a really key piece of it. There will be a lot of folks saying, I've got AI. Everybody's going to be like, yeah, whatever.
But by the way, we've seen AI on boards in booths everywhere for the past couple of years.
It's been there. But I think the key is going to be, how are you adding AI into your product, not as a core capability, but as a thing that is enabling whatever your core capability is. I think I'm hoping we're going to see this level of maturity in marketing where people aren't just going to say, hey, I'm AI, buy me. They're going to say, look, I'm AI enabled static analysis or static application security testing, whatever it's going to be. Like, it's just AI enabled.
And it actually does something this time.
So, by the way, that's our guest who I'm going to introduce in just a second. But hold on. Let me ask you a quick question, Andy. Have you done anything with AI outside of like these image generating programs, which are incredible? But if you use, say, ChatGPT for anything, you're like, oh my God, this saved me a week of work, like something that much work.
Well, I don't know that I'd say a week, but definitely it saved me multiple hours. I do a lot of these like vendor webinars where, you come on and you're the talent and they're going to say, hey, we're going to ask you 10 questions. What should they be? And I'm like, great, what's your topic? And I asked ChatGPT to give me 10 questions. And boom, it's actually really good. Stock 10 questions.
By the way, we have leaned on ChatGPT for the games that we play on our Super Cyber Friday show. It's been phenomenal. You give them the format of the game, and yeah, you do a little bit of tweaking here and there, but oh man, it saves a lot of brainstorming effort, an enormous amount.
Yeah, it's great at the questions. And then you say, give me the answers. And the answers are actually not at all insightful. I would not recommend using them, but they're nice like lodestone for you to be able to say, okay, at least I just need to make sure that I touch on those topics.
Yes. Now, we are, and I don't know the answer yet, but we're embarking on an effort with ChatGPT. I've actually got one of my producers working on it. If he's able to pull this off, it literally would be maybe a week or 2 weeks work of one person if he can figure it out. And it's about trying to categorize vendors. We have a list of vendors and we're trying to categorize them. And if we can get ChatGPT to do that for us, which is what I'm hoping,
Oh, that would be awesome.
it would be monstrous. So
Yeah.
fingers crossed, this will be like one of my big eye-opening moments of ChatGPT if it can pull this thing off. Stay tuned. All right, let's bring on our guest, who, by the way, he jumped in, but I want to give him a more formal introduction. He's the VP and CISO for onsemi, Martin Mazer. Martin, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Maybe you shouldn't have done that.
What are some of the classic blunders for a CISO? You can have the best of intentions for an organization, but being too siloed can make cybersecurity stand apart from the rest of the org, argued Bernard Brantley in a recent Dark Reading piece. Now, he pointed out some of the mistakes he's made. Now, these include not accounting for soft skills when assigning tasks to a subject matter expert, and the classic of not linking the CISO's actions with business goals. He also highlighted the idea of tying security execution with a wider impact in the company. And he posed the question, quote, am I implementing something to make my team's life easier or to benefit those outside the organization? All right, Andy, I want you to answer this two ways. One is, I want to hear your classic CISO blunder, and what do you think you've seen others? Because you've mentored and you work with a lot of organizations dealing with security. What are other classic blunders you see?
So actually, single biggest blunder, and it won't sound like one at first, is getting to be one of the approvers on product launches. Like every CISO in my generation was told, this is what you want to be. Like, this means you've made it, that you have all of the clout and the power when you get to decide if a product can launch. But the reality is the only person who gets to decide is the head of products. Because if you're deciding, what happens is they say, oh, are you going to stop this $1 billion product for this one thing? And the answer is, I'm the security guy. I'm not making a decision about your revenue. I'm making a decision about whether you did good risk management. So classic blunder, getting right in the way, and that train will just run you right over, and they will happily run you over. So I got off of that track right quick. That's sort of my classic blunder. I think the classic blunder I see from everybody, and I see this even today, is reporting on metrics that are meaningless. My favorite is click rate. Like, this is how often people click on phishing emails.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody cares. And we all know it's a made up metric.
And we've also heard the argument of it's so variable because you can create a simple one that no one will click on, and you can create an incredibly hard one that everyone will click on.
And everybody knows you can do that now. So when you report on it, you basically lose your credibility because...
And when I say simple one, I meant phishing test. I'm sorry.
Yeah, simple phishing test. Like, of course, nobody's going to click on it, but you want to send the gift card that says, hey, I know we're laying off half your friends. Go treat yourself to a spa day. Yeah, you'll get a lot of people to click on that one. And then they will hate you for it. So you hopefully aren't doing that. But it highlights the challenge that phishing is really complicated, and these metrics that we use are just awful to talk about it. And everybody knows, and they're not going to tell you to your face, but they lose a lot of respect for you when you start using those.
All right, Martin, I'm going to throw this one to you. Same thing. A, have you always been a perfect CISO your whole life? Have you ever made a blunder whatsoever? So own up to yours if you have made one. And then what do you think is the most common CISO mistake?
I would say my biggest blunder when I was kind of growing into the CISO role was trying to think that I knew more than the product or the business knew about their own product or their own business. So sometimes that little bit of CISO ego that we all know about really comes into play. And that's something I learned, that I am not the smartest person in the room, and I'm here because I know something, but I don't know everything.
I've heard that, and you don't want to be able to do everybody's job. So how do you position yourself? If you're not positioning yourself as the smartest person in the room, what is the difference between I'm the CISO, I'm the leader, and I'm not the smartest person in the room? How do you communicate that?
I'll tell you what I tell my teams, and I've told them for many years in many orgs. We're a service organization. We're here to provide a service. So if the classic metaphor, I guess, of building a car, one function builds the engine, one function builds the brakes, one function, et cetera, right? We are one of those functions. So we know that. We know our space. We know the brakes, but we don't know how the engine works. So we need to be collaborative, and we need to be that service-oriented discussion and group. All right.
Andy, I want to get your answer to that question of, like, how do you not come off as the boastful, smartest guy in the room?
Yeah. So, and one of the challenges is that security touches every engineering team. So you actually have to know a little bit about what everybody does. So for me, the metaphor of like, I'm in charge of the brakes doesn't work as much because I need to know about engine safety. I like to say we're the sidekicks, right? We are not the superhero. We're not Batman who's going out and saving things. We are Alfred. We have to make sure that Batman's suit works before Batman goes out and gets in trouble. So we have to know as much or more about Batman's suit that Batman does, but we're never going to use it. And so it doesn't matter if you're smarter. At the end of the day, you're not the superhero.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. So when you think about in a modern metaphor again of a car, an automobile, and actually working in manufacturing, you'll know that the brakes don't run independently. You'll know there's electronics, there's integrations. So if you're just the brake function, you're just the engine function, you're just the electronics function, whatever you want to call it. Those integration touch points have a pretty big impact. So it's not an isolated silo brake kind of thinking.
What's the best way to handle this?
If you follow the cybersecurity news, you know threat actors are increasingly finding ways to get around MFA, or multi-factor authentication. Often with social engineering, they do this. So a recent article on Hacker News looked at different approaches, and there's the classic adversary in the middle approach. There's the MFA bombing someone with push notifications. That's where they get so irritated they just sort of relent, if you will. There's SIM swapping, and the recently popular service desk attack like we saw with the MGM resorts, where it was actually over the phone they did that. So how common and successful are all of these, do you find? And this is the important question is, do you still feel confident in MFA still securing identities, given that these types of workarounds do exist? Martin?
I still think there's a value add here on MFA. Relying simply on who's knocking at the door kind of protection model is certainly not a great answer either, right? I'm concerned mostly about social engineering of those kind of scenarios you mentioned. I think the complexity of SIM swapping, if you're relying on some of that, SMS type texting responses and things like that, which I wouldn't recommend. If you're relying on those technologies, you can, I think, in some comfort level, rely on them. But the social engineering aspect and the complexities around that, I think, are going to be much more challenging. We have, of course, the deep fakes and all that kind of world, which is becoming much easier and cheaper to do. Those, I think, to attacking the help desk and things like that are going to be much more prevalent and a focus area for myself in the org today.
All right, Andy, where are you on the confidence spectrum? And does this actually make you less confident, or you're just as confident as you were before?
So I'm as confident as I always was in MFA, which is if you implement it well, it's a fantastic defense. If you implement a really bad point, like let's attack on MFA, it's awful. Like if you do password auth and then after password auth, you send an SMS push, what you have is single factor auth, which is SMS push, because the passwords have all been breached at this point. So this is what you have to recognize is how do you build an integrated authentication solution and tie in social engineering attacks into your threat model. Like we built this at Akamai. This is like the core of zero trust when people were first talking about it. It was the big buzzword at RSA. Like I got up on stage and explained, like, here's what we did. And what we did was actually fairly simple. Every device had an X509 certificate on it. That was the first factor, was you physically had a device that was registered to the person. And then once that device connected, you got pushed to a phone. We used a Duo. Happy to give them a few props here. I have no interest in them financially, so no conflicts there. To say, hey, is this really you? Not SMS, but an out-of-band push. And so we had these two factors coming in nice and clean. And like, you can't trigger a push without already having an authentication, which is an X509 cert. So if you don't have this, oh, I breached your password, now I can push bomb you. I've got no SIM swapping attacks. So now all I have to do is talk about how do we deal with social engineering. Number one way that social engineering works in an organization is people are afraid of executives and are afraid to make phone calls. Right? If you make it that if you're at all suspicious that this person is asking you to do something and it's okay to call them or their boss or someone else, then you don't have as big of a risk of social engineering.
That's a very good point.
Like we made it a norm that if you thought like the CEO had just called you and asked you to do something, do you know what you were supposed to do? You were supposed to email a wide open mailing list and CC the CEO saying, I just got this call pretending to be the CEO asking me to do this thing. And the CEO would say, that wasn't me. Awesome. Great job. Do you know why it was this very large mailing list? So that we got real-time training for everybody who was about to get social engineered. Because the reality is social engineers go after a bunch of your people and they don't talk to each other. Let them do so.
A CEO's top job, if I understand correctly, is to request the lowest person on the totem pole to get them gift cards.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Like all the time, get me gift cards. So our CEO would get up on stage at all hands on a regular basis and put up phishing emails that purportedly were from me telling him to do stuff so that people would know, like, it's okay that you get these messages and it's okay to challenge people even to the CEO's level.
Well, the social engineering aspect is a constant engagement. I would add, though, with modern authentication, it's not just the mechanism for authentication, the user access, whether it's app push, FIDO keys, and everything else. It's the telemetry you gain.
Yes.
The telemetry you can gain from those modern IDPs is just tremendous. So you build your processes around that. You're more or less not relying on anything except the telemetry, or primarily the telemetry and how you're going to react to it.
You remember at the top of the show, I told you about material security and that you could secure your productivity suite with material security? Well, let me tell you exactly how they're doing that. Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace aren't just applications. We kind of all know that. They're critical infrastructure. These environments are home to all your people, content, and communications. Securing these today requires a heavy set of disjointed tasks that leave blind spots and coverage gaps. Material security is the only solution purpose-built to address risk across the whole environment with the focus and depth required to make a difference. Material provides a unified suite of cloud email security, user behavior analytics, and data loss prevention purpose-built for Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace. Material integrates in minutes via Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace APIs with zero downtime. Customers get a single tenant, isolated instance, and complete control over the underlying infrastructure. Material works with organizations of all shapes and sizes. So your organization is of a shape and a size, right? So learn more about their advanced security for your cloud productivity suite at material.security. Simple as that. Just the word material.security, put it in your address bar, and you'll end up there.
It's time to play What's Worse?
All right. Martin, you know how this game is played. Two horrible scenarios. You get to decide which of the bad scenarios is the worst of the two. I make Andy answer first. You can agree or disagree with him. I always like it when you disagree, but not required. Andy likes it when you agree with him.
I get bonus points if you agree. So
We're not keeping score here, Andy. By the way, this person is anonymous. They don't live as an anonymous human being. I actually know who this person is, but they chose, for the purpose of this program, they wanted to be anonymous. I feel most of the times when people say, I want to be anonymous, is because the story they're telling is extremely close to home.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right, here we go. And by the way, these are slightly different, okay, but they are different.
Okay.
A publicly traded healthcare company was breached, and they began the process of figuring out how to respond. Millions of records. From the beginning, they knew they had incomplete records, meaning they had a name and an email address for a patient, and that's about it. They had that in their database. And they handed this database over to a reputable breach response company that enriched the data, but could only do so much and made quite a few mistakes.
Those exist.
Reputable?
Yeah, well, supposedly. So the notification process became incomplete, and it was very expensive to get it from awful to crappy. By the way, I have done projects where I took something from awful to crappy.
Yep.
So they didn't have a means to notify the people that were breached and have paid heavily for it through regulatory fines and reputational damage. Scenario number one. Okay, scenario number two. A publicly traded healthcare company was breached and they get ransom. They publicly decide to pay the very expensive ransom with the promise that the data hasn't been leaked elsewhere. So far, it looks good, but who knows? They have incomplete data, but they realize it would be very costly to try to enrich it and alert people privately that they simply do not do it. So actually, this isn't, I mean, these are opposites in a way, but they're both.
Okay.
Both. The first one, well, they paid off the ransom First one did not.
Okay.
So, but the first one knows the data was leaked. This one claims it's not, and it so far looks okay.
The ransomware broker told them that the data wouldn't be leaked, but as we've seen recently,
Yes.
that doesn't mean they're the ones who had the data.
Not pretty much the best. Anyways, just to conclude this one, they don't know yet if they're going to get fined, and the company's reputation takes a hit. So both of them get reputational damage. First one definitely got a fine. Second one, they don't know. So the second one's gambling. The first one's not gambling, but they really kind of screwed up with the data too. That's well.
So for me, this one actually is pretty clear. So I think I'm going to name our anonymous person will be Trolley Health Car.
Okay.
We got to pick which version of the trolley you're on. But in this case, like I would rather be company one. I think company two has doubly screwed up. One, by paying the ransom in a world where we know, first of all, that doesn't guarantee the data actually gets destroyed. And second of all, you don't actually know who you're paying it to. And so you might have just committed a crime by funding some entity that is on a US government deny list. And you've decided not to bother trying to do notification, which I'm pretty sure runs you afoul of a number of notification and breach disclosure laws. So the fine is coming your way, but it's going to be worse because you chose to not even bother doing the things you could have done. So company one screwed up on execution, but made all the right decisions. Company two has made all of the wrong decisions and has decided not to bother executing so they don't screw it up. I think I'd rather be company one.
But again, they don't know yet if they're going to fine, so it's not a guarantee. But you're assumed this is a guarantee. They're going to get fined.
They're going to get fined, and even if they don't get fined, like this goes into the place of like I would not want to work for that company.
Okay.
Like you have decided not to fulfill your obligation to end users.
I throw this to you, Martin. Are you agreeing or disagreeing with Andy here?
I'm thinking I'm agreeing. So yeah, I agreed. Yeah, the second company, they've already got the damage. They've got the reputational impact. They've already got the being a public company, the SEC mandatory stuff that comes along with everything. Probably breaches some customer contracts, breaches some supplier contracts. They've already got the gambit, right? And they're paying the ransom, which you can argue is the worst thing you can ever do. So yeah, I agree with Andy.
All right. Andy, kudos to you. You got someone to agree with you.
76 and 12.
Again, I want you to just randomly come up with numbers each time because
no, this is now my baseline. I'm going to increment from here.
Who are you? 76 and 12.
76 and 12.
Yeah.
Should write that down.
There you go, somewhere. So he knows what to do with it. I think it would be quite funny if you just completely changed the numbers each time and said it was such extreme confidence that people started believing you as you completely changed the numbers each time.
See, but now we've telegraphed that we would do that. So I think I'm just going to have to stick with 76 and 12 and I'll increment. Next week it'll be 77 and 12.
Look, there's a way, by the way, if anyone wants to do this, you can actually go through our transcripts and figure this out.
ChatGPT.
If anyone, or ChatGPT might be able to figure it out.
I would not trust ChatGPT's answer. I'm
sorry, you may not trust ChatGPT, but you know what I trust less? You pulling those numbers out of your butt.
Maybe. But if somebody wants to go and give me a credible number for what it has been for all of my shows, I will send them an autographed copy of my book.
Okay, there you go. All right. The challenge has been thrown.
How would you handle this situation?
How does release speed impact security? Now, it's easy to think that more deliberate development naturally leads to more secure code. But Lee Kistner argued in a recent SC Media article, quote, while it's sometimes counterintuitive, my experience has been the exact opposite. Quick releases are beneficial for shipping secure products. Now, Lee argues that the ability to quickly and frequently ship code means teams will be able to issue critical security patches faster with less risk of breaking things, as opposed to teams that ship less often and then have to do so in a hurry during an emergency. All right. It's an interesting call here that Lee makes. I'm going to ask you, Martin, does that hold water in your eyes?
I think it can. So if you're doing short sprints, you're doing quick releases, there's a couple assumptions you're making. I think this person is making as well. First, you've got a ton of automation built in. Automation you actually trust, by the way, not just automation, but automation you trust. It's proven out. You can feel comfortable with it as you're using it. And secondly, these short sprints are small deployments, which are always good, right? if you know that world, right? So short, quality automation, yeah, I think you would actually have a better visibility and better manageable versus like a quarter release that just has everything under the sun. You spend weeks and weeks testing. You've gone through multiple sprints to get there. Yeah, there's probably more bugs in that short time frame, quick releases.
That's a really good point in that example. And my feeling is there could be a happy medium. But what do you think, Andy?
So I don't think there's a happy medium. I think there's two different extremes if you want to have security and safety, right? There's one which is make very few changes, be very careful about them. Think about complex systems in the IoT world that can't take updates on a regular basis. We don't want to have people trying to push code to our cars like every 30 minutes to do sprints. So you'd better take the time to get the security right. That's going to take you longer to release. But that's not the vast majority of software out there. Vast majority of software is online, needs to be able to take updates regularly, and release agility is the single most, I think, correlated factor to security. Like, how quickly can you get from I need to make a change to the change exists in the world? The longer that's going to take, the less secure you're likely to be, because what's going to happen is the organization is going to push back against marginal changes. That if you come in and say, well, I think this is really bad, if you're saying, well, it's going to take a quarter to release a thing that might only possibly be really bad, everybody in the org's like, yeah, we're not going to fix that right now. We've got a whole bunch of product features to drop in and you don't get to disrupt us. But if like we're releasing 15 times a day and you've got a thing that, this might be bad, might be good, we're not really sure, but it takes us 30 seconds to fix, nobody's pushing back on you. Release agility is what's going to keep you sane. Now, it's also going to keep you up at night because people are rolling out software that maybe they haven't tested. So if you want to have good release agility, you should have a really powerful test suite behind it.
Yeah, I would add just once again that automation, you have to feel comfortable that the automation, your security testing automation, your verification automation processes are there. And if they're not, then nothing's going forward, right? Even in quicker or longer term. I'd also say, in what I've done in my past, there are certain thou shall never touch areas. Now, if you're making a 2-week sprints and you're releasing and you're touching identity, you're touching core infrastructure, those we're going to go through other scrutinies. So, it's not everything has to be equal kind of approach, right? The core tenets need to be tested a little differently as well.
Hey, you're a CISO. What's your take on this?
We're seeing more cybersecurity professionals looking to transition from IT into OT. Ryan Virani on LinkedIn had a few suggestions how to start making that transition. This included things like deep dive into OT fundamentals like SCADA, PLCs, and DCS, pursuing certifications like GICSP, and volunteering to get hands-on experience. And by the way, if you don't know what all those acronyms are, guess what? Has to do with OT. What else is in an IT background could apply in the OT world? I'll ask you, Andy. And which of these do you think is most important for someone looking to make this transition?
So I think if you're going to make the transition, it's actually a natural one to make, especially if you're old school IT, right? Companies are going to cloud native, and you can say, look, all of my IT skills are actually very likely to shift over into the OT space. Like, oh, look, we have these machines that don't get patched very often. Sounds like the old school Windows world. People weren't patching for a very long period. Okay, now you're just doing that to your room controllers or other things. Just a little bit, but in one sense, like shifting from IT to OT is probably about the same jump as shifting from IT to cloud-based IT. So very reasonable you want to make this transition. Recognize that you are going backwards in time in terms of supportability. OT is like old school IT was. So you're not getting to jump forward and use all the modern technologies should you go into the OT world. That said, like everything is going to be OT. We're going to see the convergence of OT back in at some point into IT, because realistically, we need to manage our buildings the same way we manage any other infrastructure.
Yeah, I'd say some of the core fundamentals of even IT architecture or security architecture directly apply to the OT side. Working for a manufacturer, of course, I'm quite intimately aware of the OT environments. Having the core capabilities of network security architecture, passive monitoring, integration to SOCs from an OT technology perspective, Andy's spot on. The technology lifecycle in many OT environments is 20 years. So you're still dealing with those legacy technologies, those same high, modern risks, impact those legacy technologies. So how are you going to segment it? How are you going to monitor it? How are you going to isolate it? How are you going to do microsegmentation? How are you going to do basic endpoint protections? Because you're never going to patch. How do you do virtual patching? All those things that maybe have shifted to cloud-based environments, those skills now relate back into the OT environment very directly.
What is something in OT, and both of you answered, that is so not seen in traditional cybersecurity that it's like would be a spanking new education for someone who has a very long and valuable history in cyber? Andy?
So I think two things. One is managing devices that you built but don't own. Right. And that's the thing we don't normally see in traditional IT. More and more companies are making big physical objects, selling them to someone, functionally it's a long-term lease, and then administering them, but you don't control these objects. Like you don't get to decide what's happening to them. And that's a very weird world. Like if you've been in the MSSP world or the MSP world, I think you are somewhat familiar with that. The other one is the volume of telemetry that comes off of these devices. I think that most people are not prepared for what real-world telemetry looks like. When people talk about big data, my experience is the IT world has no idea what big data really is.
I was, just as a quick tease to that, years ago, I was interviewing the head IT guy for one of the NASCAR racing teams. And just from a day of practice with NASCAR, they'd get a terabyte of data, of just raw data, which I found bizarre. How is it that they generate that much? But they could. Just off a race car.
Because consider that like every tire is continuously producing like a stream of data about like how much torque is on it, what temperature it's at, like what bump it's feeling, everything continuously. And now put that to every piece of the car is continuously producing this stream of evidence about the world. That's a level of data that in the IT world we've never seen.
Yeah, I'd echo the level of data that's needed. We're at a 4x difference between IT and OT ingestion, data ingestion sizing for monitoring purposes. So it is just tremendous, and it's different protocols. So that's part of that lesson learned, or how do you get into that kind of world, is how do you learn what the IT protocols versus the OT protocols? They are unique and different. They have different models, different requirements, different technologies to identify those. But it is a 4x at least difference, and it's significant.
Yeah, I've talked to companies that do telemetry ingest, and the whole big thing there is distributed compute. Like, how do you shove down models to ingest the data close to where it's being generated so that you can digest and only send up what matters? And that's a really hard problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the needle in the haystack challenge, for sure.
Yeah.
Excellent, gentlemen. That brings us to the tail end of this show. I want to thank our guest, Martin Mazur, who is the CISO over at onsemi. I'm going to let you have the very last word. But first, I do want to mention our awesome sponsor, and that's Material Security. Secure your productivity suite. Easy to find them. It's just the word material, spelled exactly the way it sounds. Not like one of those weird cyber companies that has 2 Q's and an L in it. No, it's Material Security. Although there is an L in material, where it should be.
But no Q's.
No Q's whatsoever. If you add a Q, you will not get to their site at all. Material.security. Secure your productivity suite. Check out what they're doing over there. We greatly appreciate their sponsorship. Andy, as always, we greatly appreciate it. You have thrown down the gauntlet. Someone out there figure out how many times people have agreed with Andy on the what's worse scenario. You will get a signed copy of 1% Leadership, a book that I have read and greatly appreciate. So I think it's a damn good book as well. Martin, any last words you'd like to say? And are you hiring?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It was a great session. And Andy, I haven't read your book, and if you want to ship one over, feel free. But
go find out how many people have agreed with you.
Go find out how many. Otherwise, something, buy copies for everybody in your team, and I'll send you a signed one to go with it.
That sounds like a plan. Yeah. No, thanks again for having me. And yeah, I am hiring. Check out onsemi.com. Hit me up on LinkedIn. Check out what we've got going on. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. Greatly appreciate your support of our work. Please send us more What's Worse scenarios. Challenge Andy. Give him one that's tough so people start disagreeing with him more.
I mean, here's my thing, because we recorded one recently that was really challenging. The trick is, don't just tweak one thing, because those are the easiest ones for us to be like, oh, you thought that was going to be hard. That was actually easy. Like, make things that are nearby each other, but they're sufficiently different that you're like, I have to compare an apple and an orange and decide which one is
Well,
worse.
I like it when they're truly apples and oranges, like one bad thing and then the other thing that wasn't even somewhat related to the other bad thing. And then you have to sort of weigh what bad scenario does this put me in or not. Yeah.
Right. But if you give me a rotten apple and a rotten apple with a worm in it, I might argue that I'd rather have the rotten apple with the worm because now I can go fishing with the worm.
Mm-hmm.
But like, that's kind of where many of these end up for us.
Excellent. Thank you, audience. We greatly appreciate your contributions and listening to the CISO Series podcast.
That wraps up another episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. We have lots more shows on our website, CISOseries.com. Please join us on Fridays for our live shows, Super Cyber Friday, our virtual meetup, and Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review. This show thrives on your input. Go to the Participate menu on our site for plenty of ways to get involved, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@cisoseries.com. Thank you for listening to the CISO Series podcast.